Hello, everybody. Welcome to this VanCAF interview spotlight with Kimberly Edgar. Before we begin, I would just like to state that this interview is being held on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'd also like to state that Kim is in Dawson, and they are on the indigenous land of the Dakwäkãda First Nations. I'd also like to state that Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter. We, as non-Black or non-Indigenous people, or I am Indigenous in this case, we owe it to our neighbors, we owe it to our community to step up and help guard these people and fight for their rights. So if you want to learn more information about this, you can look at Wes Harmon's land acknowledgement comic that they drew for VanCAF this year, or you can go back to last year's VanCAF and you can see my land acknowledgement comic. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Edgar.
Hi. That was really well said, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So Kim, you are a Yukon/Toronto comic artist.
Yeah.
Do you want to give yourself a little bit more of a description than that?
I don't know if I'd consider myself a Toronto comic book artist. I only lived there for 2 years. So I think I'm more of a Yukon comic book artist. So yeah, but yeah, I live here in Dawson. I'm non-binary, chronically ill, and I make a lot of comics that have to do around illness, but also plants, and a lot of my work deals with things that I am uncomfortable with, I guess. So me trying to like cope with things that I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah, you face on a lot of issues like head on with your comics. Like there's no like beating around the bushes to say. It's pretty straightforward.
Thanks. I'm trying to get a little bit more subtle in my life. But yeah.
Like your comics are very eloquent. How you present things and how you speak about them really shows how like passionate and how much you really care about these issues in your comics.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I want to say how we first met.
Yes.
And I met you, I guess your art, through judging the Broken Pencil Zine Awards.
Yes.
And that was for this book.
Bacchanalia.
Yeah, Bacchanalia. So yeah, I read this as a juror, and I was totally blown away. I loved how you put everyone's like you take everyone's horrible actions and you put accountability on them, and you and it's it's like it's a revenge comic essentially, right?
Absolutely a revenge comic.
Yeah. And a very smart one too. It's not just like pure gore and violence. It's like, hey, you did this shitty thing. Consider what you did, and you're gonna have to suffer the consequences too now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I wanted to not make it totally gore, just because I, shockingly don't actually believe in murder. And so there's a part of me that was just like, I do want, like, that's anger that comes from the sorts of experiences of like being a survivor, being assaulted, is very, like, it will be let fester if you don't allow yourself to get it out, and I think that if you're not allowed to, be upset, or if you're trying to model being the perfect victim or whatever, or, you're being gaslit and told that it didn't actually happen, like all those things prevent you from being angry properly and like getting it out of you. And then when you're that, then that kind of festers if you don't get it out, and then it turns into, I think, violence, sort of, which is what I was thinking with it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I reread all your comics last night that like I personally own, and it's kind of like a reoccurring thing in your comics is that where it's like you present something that is really uncomfortable for most people, or like everyone really, um, and you really like pick apart it like really slowly, and it's like you really show um, how these like invisible illnesses affect you and affect others and anyone who has these illnesses. um, and it's really impressive just because a lot of people don't think of a chronic fatigue illness to be a thing, or like they don't really know it's a thing, and they don't really know how they can tell someone has it. um, and
Yeah,
you depict all that, like you show all the small things like your hand shaking and losing your grip and stuff like that. So it's
thank
yeah, you
you.
speak about a lot of things that a lot of people don't talk about or don't even know about.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of silence around things like illness, I think. I maybe it's I guess it's like shame maybe, or like this idea that like we shouldn't talk about it. I mean, I think I was like tired for years and years before I was like realized anything was wrong. Just because I was like, oh, I'm just being lazy, like, like I'm just not working hard enough. Which was like objectively untrue. I think one summer during this period I worked like 40 days in a row without a break. You know what I mean? So it's like I was working hard enough, but it's just my body was failing. But yeah, due to the shame and people not talking about it, it just never even occurred to me that like that wasn't how people were supposed to feel. I just was like, guess it's aging. I was like 25. So
Yeah, it's really impressive how you depict these things that people don't ever talk about, and they don't know what exact like how it looks like. So
yeah,
it, it's I really appreciate you showing like a model of how these can be depicted.
thank
You know,
you.
uh,
Yeah, and it doesn't look the same for every person, obviously. Like, I mean, there's like a bajillion different kinds of illnesses and stuff. But so I guess I can only speak to like my own experience of what it looks like. But also, yeah, I think if more people talked about their experiences, we could start to see like the nuances of it. Because I think people have, um, they have ideas that, is that too loud?
oh, it's fun.
Squad. Okay, cool. They have these ideas with illnesses that, like, if you have, for example, celiac disease, which is one of my diseases, that the symptoms look a certain way, and then that hindered a lot of people from being diagnosed for years and years, like decades, because they were like, oh, it fits this very narrow window of what this disease is supposed to look like. But if more people talked about their experiences, I think it would really help with diagnosis because we could start to see the variation in how symptoms get presented. Whereas like my symptoms for celiac, some of them were typical, but some of them were very atypical. And so I didn't get it caught for like years for that reason. So yeah, and same with things like fibromyalgia or whatever. So like more communication about these things, I think would not only like destigmatize, but also probably help people be like, oh, that happens with this disease. Interesting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And it's like another thing you really talk about is how these invisible illnesses, how they don't present themselves like physically usually, and how you can look like a healthy person, and
Yeah.
you have this guilt over being like, well, I should be young and I should be healthy. How come I can't do these things?
Oh God, yeah. And then like every older person is just like, oh, you're young, like you're fine, like you got all the energy, like live your life, like, and it's just like that's weird because I don't. So, yeah, it's a lot of people making these assumptions. And again, yeah, I think talking about it, depicting it, and like being more open about it can like let people know that illness looks a lot of different ways and it doesn't look just one way.
Yeah, and you're telling your story. You're telling about your experience. It's not like
Mhm.
you're saying, "Oh, well, my friend down the street feels this way." You're like, "No, this is me. This is how I'm feeling."
Exactly. Yeah.
You're not speaking for anyone else. You're telling your own story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really important because um, a lot of people will just bundle up mental health or bundle up invisible illnesses as kind of just like a generic thing, like, oh, everybody feels this way or everybody feels that way, and it's not the case at all. It's, you know, it's a person by person basis.
It's so specific to each individual person. Yeah, no, it's true. I only speak for like, I tend to, the stories are a whole, I mean, like, they're like fictional, but they're also like about me, obviously. But like, or to some degree, and I'm trying to move away from that and talk about create characters that are a little more detached from myself. But at the same time, I think I don't want to get trapped in that cycle of just only talking about my own experience. And I'm not saying I want to like talk for other people, but I just now that I'm trying to write a little bit more fiction-based stuff, I'm trying to sort of do research and try to figure out ways like just to represent other kinds of people's experiences without necessarily like speaking for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And like reading all your comics, you can definitely get a sense of how there's like that it's a fictional story, but there's like, you know, a chunk of truth within each story.
Yeah.
You know, usually the moral of the story. Yeah, so before we get too far away from the Yukon, I just wanted to know, how did you discover Dawson's art scene, and what ended up bringing you there?
I got here, the reason I moved here was because when I was like 20, I was like working at an HMV in Ottawa, which is where I'm from. I'm from Ottawa. And I had just come back from living abroad in Ireland, and I was like in this like travel mode in my head. And some person in this HMV was like, oh yeah, like I spent a summer going to Dawson, hung out with a bunch of like pot smoking hippies, made thousands of dollars working at a cafe, and then came back with a bunch of money. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. So I basically was like bookmarked it in my mind as being a place I wanted to go. But then a bunch of stuff happened in my life, and I like moved to Denmark, and then I came back and I had like a partner for a while, and then I was in art school. And so by the time I was able to actually get up here was I was 25, and I kind of came up here with no plan, except for the plan to go to kayak and be like, hi, because I'd been applying to kayak since like midway through my art school career, because I discovered it and I was like, that's cool. And so I kept sending these like shitty applications. Like, they were like, looking back, and I found old ones, I'm like, oh, these are so bad, because it was still like second year art school, you know. But I was like, sure. And so I'd been applying to their stuff and like looking at their website and like doing that for like a couple of years. And then when I moved up here, like I think the second day I was here, I went into kayak and was like, I'll volunteer for you. Yeah, and so that's how I got in touch with people at kayak. And then through that, like I was like doing like the dark room club, which was a thing then in 2014. And then what else was I doing? Like I, you know, did something for the Yukon Riverside Arts Festival. I tabled at the artist market. Yeah, so like that's kind of, I think, how I got to know people in the community. Also like oh man, DCMF obviously was another thing. So yeah.
I should mention, kayak is the Klondike Institute of Art and Culture, which is an art gallery. The Odd Gallery is the gallery inside kayak. But, excuse me, but kayak is an artist-run center, and they have 2 residencies. They have multiple studios. They help run the Dawson City Music Festival. They're a pretty important part of Dawson's art scene.
I think it's do they help with the DCMF? I guess they do.
I think, well, members who work there help organize it.
True, yeah. But I think that's because it's such a small scene that everyone has like fingers in like every pie.
Yeah. People in Dawson wear like 6 hats, and they're all like, I help organize a nonprofit festival in Keno, and I also carve, and it's like, yeah, it's crazy how productive people are in Dawson.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what attracted me to it also, is this, because it's like a small enough community, even though it's like got this really robust art community that attracts people from all over Canada and the world who are like, you know, really cool artists for residencies and programming and stuff. But even then, it seems small enough that it's manage, like I could feasibly start something, or I could get involved, or I could like be in a position where I can like help out, and give back to the community. So I do like the fact that everyone wears like 6 different hats in this town. Although it's easy to burn out when you're wearing too many hats, turns out.
I mean, I feel like growing up there, I think it definitely has to do with the sun, because it just looks like 3 p.m. outside all the time.
Yeah.
And when you're like half asleep and you're tired and it's like 4 a.m, you look outside and you go, oh no, it's only 3 p.m. Right. And then like your brain is like used to the daylight. So you're just like in work mode all the time because it's like 24 hours of sunlight in the summer.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're right in the middle of that right now. And it's like, I'm just like gardening and stuff. And I'm like, whoops, it's 1 a.m. Like,
yeah, I guess it was solstice this week, right? So
yeah.
Did you go up to the dome?
No. Do you know when I stayed in, it was pouring during solstice weekend, like actual torrential downpour, like more than just a little bit of rain, like it flooded. So we decided to stay in and hung out on our deck here. But usually we don't go to the dome. Usually we go to top of the World Highway, and hang out in the bush there.
Right. Do your own thing away from the crowd.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Other friends go up too. It's becoming like a little second, like, queer artist hangout there. So.
Right. Cool.
Anyway.
Yeah. I would. Yeah. Dawson's such a cool community. I could definitely see myself moving back there, just because there's so many cool people and like the scene is so tight knit, and everything in Dawson is so resourceful.
Yeah.
Like I saw it happen to you this week, how you were like, I got a bunch of mushrooms, but you need a dehumidifier, and someone in Dawson's just like, oh yeah, you can borrow mine. It's fine. And it's
absolutely.
like that for almost everything in Dawson.
Yeah, or like my neighbor is building a greenhouse and I'm copying her by building a tinier greenhouse. And we were like, oh no, we need lumber. We could go to the lumber store, but first let's stop by the dump. And it was like, as we were at the dump picking out pieces of free lumber, we like 4 trucks came up who were like dumping perfectly good lumber, and we're just like hovering around the trucks like ravens, being like, oh, what you getting rid of? Like, oh, that I'll just take that right from you there. Like, it's yeah, it was really, and it's great because it's like we just got like enough lumber to build like a greenhouse and a half for free. Yeah,
you gotta love the Dawson dump.
Yeah,
so resourceful. Another thing that you can just like, you can go there and you can be like, well, I need a bike frame, but you'll come home with like 10 VHSs, and bag of clothes, and whatever else you can find in the free store.
It's perfect. The free store's closed for a bit though because of COVID, so that sucks. But
yeah, totally fair and understandable. Yeah, so like you've done a ton of traveling. So I'm curious, like comics are such a easy thing to like pack up and take somewhere else to work on. And you've done so many residencies, so I'm curious what it's like to go to a different spot and build up your new studio and then to create in a different space.
Yeah, well, for residencies, yeah, it is quite portable, as you said. I mean, and even then, like when I arrived at my most recent residency at the Swingtula Art Shed in BC, I feel like my backpack and like my suitcase were like so heavy because it just had like every kind of paper imaginable, because I was like, what if I need this paper? What if I need that paper? Maybe I should take 2 full things of Bristol as well, just in case. And it, like, I had way too much paper. And like I had all my paints, and I was like, but what if I want to use this? So like it's portable, but also like, and people can do it a lot less bulky than I do, but I think I'm just so like, I like having all my inks around and all of my paints and stuff, so it gets a little heavy. But I really like the process of going to a new place and setting up a studio for like a month and working. There's something about it that like being away from your home gives you like a different mindset, and there's like much less distractions, and it's very meditative for me to be like alone for a month and just like working on something. So because I have ADHD, and so one of the symptoms, or not symptoms, one of the bonuses of ADHD is hyperfocus. And so when I'm alone for a residency, I can like hyperfocus like so much. It's bananas. And so yeah, I end up getting like a lot done in that period. And there's always like this beautiful sense of like stepping outside of your home and out of your context to be in a new context. Like I always find that very fertilizing, if that makes sense. Like it really adds to, I think, whatever I'm making.
Another plant analogy.
Yeah, that's all I think about now.
Well, I think it's very appropriate with, considering the subject matter of your comics and how plants are almost like a secondary character.
Yeah.
Especially in very certain comics, it's like, yeah, the plant is a character. Like Nerves, it's like half the character in that comic are the roots.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the process of humanizing non-human lives, if that makes sense. I did a lot of reading of Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and also Gathering Moss, and she writes a lot about like how in her mother tongue, or not her mother tongue because she's learning it, but she's Potawatomi, and so that language, they have like pronouns for every like living thing. And so, and she talks a lot about that in her books. And I just thought that was like the idea of everything living having its own separate pronoun that's different from the ones that like we're used to. Like, it just made me think a lot about it's not human, but it's like personhood of things.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Yeah. So I try to make the non-human persons in my comic persons.
Yeah, I mean, they're just like an extension of humanity, and like, your emotions, can affect, the things around you, and even plants and stuff. So yeah, I really like that the plants are like a constant reoccurring character, and it's not just like, oh, I only make comics that involve roots. It's like you make comics about moss and trees and like just nature interacting with humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the way you make comics they're like they're like traditional in the sense of like, they're comics, but it's like kind of non-traditional storytelling in that sense.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to do. Oh, thank you.
Oh man, this video is just a bunch of compliments for you. It's true though. I'm genuinely, I'm saying this because it's true. I'm not just BSing.
I really appreciate that.
Okay, yeah. So we'll continue more about the Yukon. What's it like in Dawson to get comics?
Oh, I order them online.
Yeah.
100%. Sometimes Maximilian's has them. Maximilian's is like the bookstore in town, and I worked there for a couple of years. Love Maximilian's. Marion is a delight. She owns it. And so she usually has a pretty good selection of books, but I think just because she's like limited to a very specific set of suppliers, there's a lot of ones that she can't get in. So most of the time, I think because the things I'm interested in tend to be like more like indie comics and that sort of stuff, I order them online, often from Lucky's in Vancouver, which I love. Yeah, but that's how I get them.
Yeah, when I was living in the Yukon too, it was like if I couldn't order it at Titans, the one comic shop in Whitehorse, I would just order
one comic shop in the Yukon.
the whole Yukon. Yeah, that's right. Shout out to Titans.
Yeah, Titans.
They were the first comic shop to have my stuff on their shelves, and
Also, they're so good. They take zero cut. They'll give you all of the money. It's
yeah,
so like so so sweet.
yeah, Sean is a total sweetheart. I've known Sean pretty much my whole life. I went to his wedding. He married my old babysitter. That's how small the Yukon is, you know?
I love it.
Yeah, like Sean, he sold me Pokemon cards when I was like a child, you know?
Oh,
And now he
yes,
sells me comics.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
it's even more special because when I go there, I always see your comics besides mine.
Yay! Yeah, every time I see them, I take a picture of both of them together, like, ah!
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you know you're a Yukon comic artist. You have your comics for sale at Titans.
It's true. It's very true.
Yeah. What about freelance in the Yukon?
Oh man, yeah,
What?
it's like complicated because it's like good and it's really good and also like kind of annoying at times because on the one hand, Yukoners support other Yukoners like hardcore. Like
Mhm.
Yukoners will always hire a Yukoner if they can. They'll like um support local. So there's like a lot of people like really excited about giving money to other people, which is awesome. So I feel like I do get a lot of jobs like that. Like recently, I designed a line, like a 3 different pins for Selkirk First Nation, which was really great. And then I've done pins for Tombstone Territorial Park, and like I have sell wholesale to like the Collective Good and Whitehorse, and so yeah, it's like really nice that people want to keep their business within the territory, but also like there's not many people here, so the amount of jobs are still smaller, if that makes sense. But because I do pins, I think I've become like the de facto pin guy at the moment. So if anyone wants someone to design an enamel pin and get it made, like they'll come to me. So I've been getting freelance work through that a bit. And also, yeah, and some illustration can be distance as well. So I have done a very small amount of illustration distance wise, but it can be difficult because if you're not going out and like meeting people down south, they don't really know you exist,
Mhm.
which is like great. That's why I think I did so much traveling to different fairs and festivals so that I'd suddenly be like a person on their radar. But now, we're not doing that. So, yeah. So it's just like, but it's slowly but surely like coming along. And then recently, like someone contacted me like out of the blue for like an illustration for a coloring book, and that was really surprising because I'd like literally never heard of this person before.
Mhm.
It was like for the Canadian embassy in Peru, and I was like, how did you find me? And I guess like all of my networking is slowly paying off because people are finding me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but then on the other hand, in the Yukon, there's like a huge like grant system that's really great, and I just recently got a project grant. So that's also like I guess that's not freelance per se, but like there's still like a lot of funding here.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities in the Yukon, which I think they're a lot more accessible
Hmm.
because how small the pool is.
Yes.
But it's also like super like full of nepotism and like you do need to know these people. Like that's kind of just like the
Yeah.
art world in general.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it's totally like you kind of do have to network. Yeah, but it's also like I I think once you get one thing, people start noticing you and then you get more things after that. So I think sometimes it's just breaking in to get the first thing, like the
yeah.
first job or the first like project or whatever. So suddenly people see your stuff around, and then once they see your stuff around, like you're kind of in their head. They're like, "Oh yeah, maybe that person can do it."
Mhm.
So, yeah, there is a lot of nepotism for sure. But I think it's also like sort of self promo as part of it too.
Yeah. I still get like a lot of Yukon mail because I'm on a mailing list for a bunch of things. And I always get like letters from the Council of Yukon First Nations or like my band Champagne-Ajac First Nation. And whenever something Yukon gets sent to me and it has like a spot illustration in it, I like immediately check who it is. Because I'm like, who's this new Yukon art? How come I've never seen this art before? And they're a Yukoner, and I like creep and I see if they have an Instagram or if they have a website and like see how professional they are, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And then it's this sort of thing of like, wait, what do you mean I don't know who this person is? And then it's like, oh wait, like I guess like I've been gone for this many years. So like theoretically this person could have been there for that period of time that I was gone. But yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, I'm always curious because I'm always like, part of me is like, how come I didn't get this job? Or like, how come I didn't know about this job? But the other half of me is like, yes, there's a new Yukon artist. Yes, there's a new illustrator.
It's so funny. Like I do the same thing, but like for everything. And I know it's just like the tiny ego in me. Like every time I see anything, I'm like, why didn't I get that? And I'm like, Kim, you didn't even apply for it. Like, of course you didn't get it.
Yeah,
Like,
I didn't even know about
why?
it.
I didn't even know about it. But it's just that like little ego, I guess. And then yeah, because I'm like 95% like happy every time for people. But I guess that's a normal thing for humans. I'm gonna just move inside if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
My battery is dying, so I need to plug it in. But you can see, I guess, as I'm walking.
How beautiful.
Yeah. We
Your
live on a
little
dredge
slice of
pond.
paradise.
Yeah, oh my god, it's so nice. It also was like raining for a week, so it's sunny for the first time in forever, which is why I wanted to.
And everything's all nice and green.
Yeah. Oh, do you know this is being recorded?
Camel by Junebug.
That's my partner Juno. She's also a comic book artist.
An amazing comic book artist, I should add. Very talented.
Yeah, she's extremely talented. I agree. Anyway, okay, carrying on.
Yeah. So like, you table at like everything, and I want to know. I mean, I kind of already know the answer, but what is it like tabling in the Yukon, and you know, tabling at things that you wouldn't necessarily consider yourself tabling at?
What do you mean by that?
Oh, I just mean like tabling at, say at like a craft fair or like tabling at a music festival.
Right.
Like something that wouldn't normally sell illustration.
Yeah. The craft fairs here are always wonderful. And I think that's because, again, like I said before, the Yukon loves to support Yukoners. And so everyone just shows up like with their government dollars from like working their government jobs or whatever, and they just like throw down for things made by Yukoners. It's so wonderful. So I love the craft fairs here. Over Christmas, like the craft fairs, I make so much money. And it's just simply because it's like the Yukoners just like love to support each other. And that community makes it really wonderful. I tabled at like artist markets and stuff when I first came here, like summer markets and everything, but that was a lot more tourists, so it was a bit of a different vibe. I also was a very inexperienced tabler, so I think that also added to the difference maybe. And so, but yeah, like the tabling at the events here, what else have it's mostly been craft fairs, I think. And then the Dawson Publishing Festival, I've tabled at that multiple times. Print and Publishing Festival.
Yeah, I should mention too that we worked on a workshop together, week-long workshop at the Print and Publishing Festival last year.
Yes.
Made a community zine together.
It was like 2 10-hour days. It was very intense.
Yeah, it was. Such a fun weekend though.
Yeah. Juno drank my coffee. Wow. What a jerk. We met at TCAF. But we actually met like years ago. I just don't think you remember. But you came up to Dawson to visit. And I think Dan Brown was there and maybe Nathaniel and like other people like Eliza. And I remember meeting you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It would have been like the summer after I left Dawson.
Yeah. It was like my first summer or whatever, but I remember meeting you and people were like, oh yeah, that's cool, Paul is like, he was here during like this year or whatever. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then like every time I'd see like when you were like judging the Broken Pencil Zine Awards or like doing this or that, I'd always be just like, oh yeah, cool Pauls. Like I met him. Like, yeah, but also I understand if you don't remember that. I was new to Dawson.
I distinctly remember being at the Toronto comics festival, like art festivals after party.
Yeah.
And you were there and you were like, you're cool. You judged me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I did judge you. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like the first conversation I remember having with you was at the TCAF after party and hanging out with Jonathan.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Jonathan's the editor of Broken Pencil, I should say.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you one more question about the Yukon before we continue. What is it like selling your artwork to the Yukon Permanent Art Collection?
Yeah, that was extremely validating. Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. I got the news when I was in one of those periodic dips in my artistic confidence where I was like, I'm garbage. And then they were like, you sold it to the Permanent Art Collection. And so that was a really nice boost when I really needed it. Yeah, and like learning, I think when I applied, I didn't quite understand what the Permanent Art Collection was until I got in, and then I was like, somebody was like, you realize this means that they're gonna like preserve your piece as part of Yukon history like forever. And I was just like, what? Like,
I would say you're a permanent Yukon artist now.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, no matter where you move, you're still a Yukon artist now.
Yeah, so that was like, I'm still kind of like processing it, and it's been like months, but and I had like a Zoom conversation with Erin, who is currently running it, and she's like asking me all these questions about preservation and like what kind of paper it was on and stuff, and yeah, it was just, it's been a really wonderful experience. Yeah, it's my first permanent art collection, so
yeah, no, it's super validating, especially as a Yukon artist now.
Yeah, and apparently like a friend of mine was on the judging panel, and she said because she's my friend, she stepped off to like back off to like not have a
bias.
Yeah, that's the one. And she told me afterwards, she was like, yeah, like they really liked your piece. Like they were like debating between this piece and another one of your pieces, and everyone was like really firmly entrenched in their opinions about like the pieces, but they were like trying to decide between buying one or the other.
They picked the caribou one. Yeah, that's probably my favorite one out of the whole series, personally.
Thank you. Yeah, I really am attached to that one too, so I'm really happy that it will be preserved, because I don't keep my art very well. I really need to get a better system.
Yeah, this is a good segue, because rereading all your comics, I learned that maybe I didn't really notice it the first time, but you rarely use like black lines. Yes. It's almost always a different color, like dark blue or green or purple.
Yeah. So some of them, the earlier ones, the reason the line work is different colors is just because I did it like with black pen and then scanned it and digitally. It was like for risograph purposes. I changed the colors, but I like don't like using black lines if I can help it, because I really am interested in how color plays next to each other. And when you have black lines separating colors, it's sort of like it separates them, which is like awesome if that's what you're going for. But like I like what happens when you have two colors interacting. And also I got really so the first couple of comics I made, I inked with like a black pen, scanned them like I said before, and then the purpose, I started inking with like what's it called, like a colored pen instead, but then I got bored of that as well. And so I just was like, pens are boring, and like I just started inking instead with like a watercolor brush and using colored ink or watercolors to ink. Yeah, and so it's been sort of getting more and more out of hand as I like try to find things to keep my like I get bored so easily, so I'm constantly trying to keep myself entertained with things. So right now I'm enjoying inking with a brush with like indigo or sepia or sometimes Payne's gray. But I never use black ink, and even when things look black, it's because I mix together like indigo and sepia usually, because that creates a very warm black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really helps with your watercolors, I think. Like it
Yeah.
gives it a total different depth to it. And yeah, like you said, like, you know, a comic page that's just full of black lines really does break the difference between the two colors mixing or touching each other. And
Yeah.
putting a purple or putting a dark blue instead of a black, like the three colors that are touching all balance with each other rather than like stop at each other.
Yeah, and I mean, like, black work can be incredible. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I love Mike Mignola's use of black, for example. But yeah, I think for me, it's just I was scared of using color all throughout art school up until like maybe like 2 years ago, and I did everything black and white because I didn't understand color theory enough until I just like found, I think, a method that worked for me. And so ever since then, I've been just like not using black lines for that reason.
Yeah, no, I think it really works well, and I'd like to see a whole graphic novel used without black lines. Maybe that's a challenge
Maybe
for myself, but I think you do a good job at it.
maybe it'll happen. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Um, yeah, so like a lot of your comics are Riso, and a lot of your comics are like watercolor, like full watercolor paintings. So what's what's your like what's your process from making a watercolor painting ready for Riso? Because that, to me, that seems like really complicated.
Yeah, it's really not. I just separate it. So I find uh, in the past people have been like, you should separate it into CMYK and definitely have that black layer. But I found when I've done that, because I don't actually use black in my paintings, it kind of like mutes out all of the other colors and they seem washed out. So what I've done instead, I learned this from Erica actually, because one of the prints I made with her from Moniker Press, she was like, I'm going to do CMY to sort of like fake the CMYK or something, like in a really cool way, and it worked beautifully. And so I just separated it all into CMY, and then I do that in Photoshop. I delete the K, but sometimes if I need to, if there's like a lot of dark, I'll boost the K layer in the C layer, so the cyan is has a little more of the black information in there, and then I go through and anything like that risks being illegible if there's an accidental misregister, like words, for example. I'll go in and I'll choose one of the layers that I want it to be, and I'll just erase all of it from the other layers. So like words, for example, I'll usually choose cyan to be the words, and so I'll erase it in the yellow and the magenta layer. And then like, or like if I choose another color, I can do that. But other than that, like I generally keep it at the levels. And then when I separate them into like C, M, and Y, I boost the contrast of all of them so that there's like a higher like black and white situation. I auto contrast it is what I do. And then, yeah, so that's usually how I prep the files. And then depending on the printer, usually they have the ink colors. I like defer to them for whatever ink colors they think are best for CMY. And that's why I like working with the Riso printers, is like they have like so much, obviously, like knowledge about their machines and about which inks look good. So it's like I'm just sort of like, I don't care what inks you use, I just kind of want it to look sort of like this, like and they always come up with like the inks that work best with their machines and stuff, and it always looks so interesting, and it will like never look like the original, but I love the transformation it goes through when it goes through the Riso process. It becomes something altogether different. And like yeah, and so I think that's what's valuable to me, is like I want it, like, I do want certain things to come through, obviously, but then like color wise, but then also at the end of the day, I know it's like a whole different beast when you print it, so I just like love it as its own object.
Yeah, I reread as much as I could through the zines that we've traded and stuff, but I couldn't find some, like, I swear I have a copy of Monster somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So I had to read it on your website, which conveniently has like a lot or all of your comics?
Most.
Most of them?
Most of the ones that aren't 30 pages.
Right. Yeah. So like,
Yeah.
it was great because I was like, oh, I can just read these on your website and fill in the cracks that I didn't reread. And it was a total different experience reading this as a Riso comic versus reading it as a digital comic, because
Yeah.
this is a lot more fuzzier and warmer compared to like, you know, your digital file.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that I found that really interesting.
I love that. And I love when the book has its own presence, like it kind of becomes its own art piece, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm so obsessed with Riso. I'm low-key always looking to find a Riso close to me that I could buy, because I want to start like a small press up here. But like that might be farther into the future than I'd like.
Yeah, that's a lot of planning.
It's a lot of planning. A lot of
Especially
money.
bringing a Riso up to the Yukon, because I don't think there's one hanging out in someone's basement somewhere in the Yukon.
Imagine. Oh man, I wish. I think like I heard once there was like one for sale in Prince George, and I wish I knew about that because it was like maybe like a year ago or something. But yeah, so my biggest hope is for one in Vancouver, and then I can maybe find a way to ship it up. But
Yeah, so many complications. Like,
yeah.
I think that's why Rizo is so impressive to me, is that like when you go behind the curtain and you see the stages it takes to make a book, and then like you learn that like, oh, this person had to put in the same piece of paper 4 times to get all 8 colors they wanted on that paper, you know? And
Yeah.
they had to have all that focus and like power to make their registration perfect, and like make sure the paper wasn't crooked when it came through and stuff. Like there's so many places
Yeah.
where mistakes can happen.
Well, it's funny too, because like I studied printmaking in art school. So I feel like in some ways the Riso is almost not an easier, but it's like it's very familiar to me, like that absurd amount of work to get it through, but it's also faster because you can somehow like do 50 real quick, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but it's also more foreign because it's a machine, and I'm so used to doing everything like with myself. So having a machine suddenly adds a layer of obfuscation.
Yeah.
I fucked that word up. Of like difficulty, you know? It's like a wall of like I don't really know what's like machines are like a little challenging to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. But
Yeah,
you know,
it's like a lot of tweaking, but once you get everything ready, you can just pump out 200 copies of something. And that's
yeah.
like when I went to Emily Carr, I took a bunch of bookbinding classes and printmaking classes too. And I really like my grad piece was on the Vandercook letterpress. And that's the same thing where it's like, so it's so complicated to set up and have it perfect on the print bed, where like you get the registration perfect for your paper, you got to make sure the right amount of ink is on the surface, all these things. But once it's all ready, you can literally pump out like
Yeah.
100 prints in like 30 minutes. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy how fast you can print things once everything's set up. It takes 2 hours to set up, but it
Yeah.
takes 30 minutes to print it all.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. Same with like silkscreen. Yeah, I used to do like these absurdly large dry points when I was in art school that like took like 2 hours to print one block like once. So I really appreciate these fast methods. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you'd ever see yourself writing a long form story?
It's funny you should ask. So on Wednesday, July 1st, I'm starting what is now a remote residency with Jenny House in Whitehorse. So I was supposed to be in Whitehorse for this residency, but they made it remote for obvious reasons. And it's my first paid residency too, which is really amazing. And the whole project is I'm researching to write a long form comic. So I'm doing research, and I'm hopefully going to come out of it with some kind of scripty, storyboardy thing. And I'm hoping for it to be, I don't know, like 60, 90 pages, but I wanted to have like a much longer narrative because I've never done that before and it seems daunting.
Yeah, I always find like at the at this stage of the comics, I'm always like, yeah, this comic will be like 18 pages. And then you thumbnail it and you're like, whoa, this is actually like 30 pages. And then you actually draw the pages on the final artwork and it ends up being like 25 pages.
Yeah, it's impossible to like fit.
It like grows and then shrinks and then kind of goes in the middle.
Yeah. Juno's having that with her comic, actually, my partner. She just added 6 more pages to her comic because she realized the story just kept, she needed more detail to it. So, yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of comics, right? You can kind of just like shove 5 extra pages in between 2 pages you thought you didn't have enough information on, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's, I love comics for that.
Same.
Yeah, because like I was reread all your zines and stuff. I kept on being like, wow, I wish this was longer. I don't mean that in a bad way or anything. I was just like, I want to read more about this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think usually it's also time constraints because I usually give myself, I'm like, I have to make this comic in time for like TCAF or something. Yeah. And so, with the time constraints, I'm only able to make like a 20 or 30 page comic. But also like I think I'm trying to like be better at writing stories, and I think drawing is something that I've been doing since I like basically came out of the womb, and so I'm pretty comfortable making imagery, but I think writing stories is where I struggle and where I'm really trying to improve, which is another reason why for this residency it's going to be a lot of reading. I'm reading a lot of books to sort of get a narrative basis for the story that I want to write. And so I've been working a lot on stories and like reading things that other people write and like trying to be like, people write stories about anything. Like it could be literally anything. And so, yeah, trying to build my confidence for that. So I think maybe I didn't have the confidence to make a longer thing before, as well as time, but now I'm got accepted to this residency, so I have to do it. So can't back out now.
Yeah, you're stuck. You committed.
Yeah, exactly.
I think like that's probably why I've focused on short story comics for so long, was because the commitment issue of, oh, I want to do this thing. I have 4 months to do it. And then you try your best to, complete your deadline. And it comes to crunch time and you're like, wow, I can either finish this and call it a done project after 5 pages, or I could continue doing what I want and I have to skip this festival.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times I've just been like, okay, now I have to do this deadline. I have to have a new book out for TCAF or VanCAF or the Vancouver Art Book Fair, because a lot of these fairs and festivals, it's like the recurring customer, right? Like you have the Yukon, it's like you have the same 25 people that come to your table and buy stuff from you. But what happens when that person has bought one of everything off your table? Yeah. You have to think about that person who's like buying your thing for the 6th time, the 7th time.
Yeah, and like they want something new. Totally. And I have like so many like half-finished projects lying around too, that I can usually draw upon, but that pressure to produce something by a deadline, I think, is what has hindered me a bit in the past. Also, I have ADHD, and so I get bored really easily, and so I'm trying to like, focus on a thing.
You're also working with watercolors most of the time. Like some of your older comics are just like line work with colored backgrounds for Riso or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I did watercolor comics for like a brief short amount of time, and it is so tough. And there's so much waiting around for things to dry.
Oh yeah, I'm waiting for something to dry right now.
Yeah, and like you're impatient, so you like start working on something, and then like it starts bleeding into the color, and then you're like, oh, I messed up the whole thing, and then you have to like put paper towel on it, and then you have to like rework the spots that you dried up, and
yeah,
it's a big process to do watercolor.
It is. I think the more I do it, like the faster I get, in the sense that like I have a rhythm now and I have a process, which also I think makes me like a little uncomfortable because I don't want to get lazy in that and always rely on the same thing. But like, so I want to like switch it up or challenge myself a little bit more. But at the same time, having that base process is nice because I find that the further I get, the fewer, not like I make like a lot of mistakes, but the more zen I am about the mistakes. So like I'm getting just looser and I'm like, whoops, it bled into that thing. Like now it's part of it, you know?
Yeah, you're really good at doing watercolor comics. I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know how to make that sound more eloquent, but you do a really good job at it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Look at my other. Yeah. So like your comics, a lot of them aren't about you, but they're part autobiographical. And then like Warm Winter is about you.
It's totally about me.
And you talked about it earlier about how like you put yourself in a lot of these characters and you're trying to maybe step away from that. But I really like it, honestly.
Thanks.
Like knowing you as a person and then reading your comics, I'm like, oh, this is like totally Kim. This is 100% you, you know? I think like knowing an artist and then rereading their work, you get a different perspective of their art and your appreciation of their art.
Yeah. Juno also makes fun of me being like, all of your main characters look like you, but with slightly different hairstyles. So
Depending on what summer it was when you drew it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that I'm starting to kind of come to this realization for myself that sometimes there's more truth in fiction than there is in nonfiction, you know? And so I think the nice thing about like having these like semi-fictionalized stuff that's like still sort of about me but also isn't, is that I can push things. If it were like autobio, then there'd suddenly be like, did that actually happen? Is this actually real? Did you actually say it that way? And it's like, instead, because it's fictionalized, I can push it to a degree that is maybe exaggerated or hyperbolic, but to make a point, but it doesn't have to be like, that's me, because it's just fiction.
Yeah, it seems it would be less intimidating to write a story about yourself but not present it as yourself.
Yeah, that too. Writing full autobio can be fraught that way.
Yeah. Like reading Warm Winter, it's a very personal story. You know, like you're talking about you're realizing like your symptoms and like your illness, and then it has your name on it and it has who you are and it has Juno in it and stuff, you know? So it's like very personal story compared to say Nerves or I can't even, how do you pronounce this?
Bacchanalia.
Yeah. Yeah, like those stories are great and they have very important meanings, but when you read Warm Winter, it like it felt way more serious than anything else you've done.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe that's just because I know you and I know who you are personally, but I was like, whoa, this feels a lot heavier than anything else you've ever done.
Oh, thank you. I think it's also the first time I really tried to talk about illness with comics. So maybe that has something to do with it also. Yeah, I think with autobio, the thing that sort of alarms me with some of the things I'd like to talk about in the future is that I don't want certain people to be thrown under the bus in certain scenarios, you know, or I don't want them to feel misrepresented, or I don't want them to, like, because when you're doing autobio, I mean, I obviously asked Juno before I made that. I was like, hey, are you okay with this being you? And she was just like, she like laughed at it. So yeah, it was fine. And then my friend Jim Bob, I like gave him a copy. I was like, you're in my comic, because he was the one who picked me up hitchhiking. Right. So yeah, like I was just wanting to make sure I wasn't depicting anyone in a way that they didn't want to be, and so there's a freedom to like fictionalizing this, because suddenly you can like play with that sort of like I would feel weird doing autobio if I was like talking about someone and their flaws, you know? And I think with the Warm Winter, there is like a fight that me and Juno get into that's sort of an amalgamation of a lot of fights where I don't think either of us were right or wrong. We were just sort of like both frustrated. And again, she was like okay with that. But you know, there's like, if I would want to talk about abuse that I experienced, for example, like I would want to not put other people in harm's way for that. So
yeah,
it's a tricky thing for that sort of stuff.
yeah. And like the space between, I think that's another comic of yours that is like at the same stature of Warm Winter.
Oh,
Like the emotional story of it, and like reading it last night, I was like, oh man, this hits hard, you know.
thank you.
um
Juno said it was very uncomfortable in it, like in a good way. And I think I like making stories that are a bit uncomfortable, hopefully. So I think that's a goal I'm going towards.
I remember like I drew my first autobio comic when I was in art school, and a lot of people liked it, and they were like, Cole, you should do more. And I was like, no, I don't like autobio comics. They're boring to me. And now I've like totally grown an appreciation for them. But I think it's because like some autobio comics like yours have a story that has really, like, you get a lot of merit from it, and you learn something about like health issues or like just about yourself. And then there's other comic artists who make autobio comics that like, it just seems like they're just talking about their mundane day, and it has like no meaning besides like recording like a diary comic essentially, you know? And it's like for themselves, which is, you know, a good thing. It's a good thing to practice that and draw things for yourself. But I just don't find that very interesting personally. But your autobio comics, I'm gonna say, do not do that.
Thank you.
they're very, I found them very interesting and worthwhile to read. And I think your zines are worthy of like a short story collection. I would really like to see them collected together.
I would love to do that eventually. And it's I think I'm with you on the autobio thing. It's like I feel like there's so much autobio, it's almost like maybe an oversaturated market. And you know, there's value, and if people get things from it, that's ultimately that's amazing. Like, you know, but the stories that I'm interested in do tend to be usually somewhat fictionalized, or like, I think the difference maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, of what you're saying is autobio for autobio's sake versus autobio as a medium to get to a different, like a message or like an idea. And I think that ultimately, like, if people can make things with like no end message that they want to convey or like idea or something. But I think I feel like I resonate also with autobio that has sort of a purpose. It's like autobio as a vehicle, not as an end result. But also know, like, you know, it's fine if other people like it. Like, I don't want to shit all over what people enjoy, you know?
I don't want to say that either, because autobio comics are valid.
They're so valid.
I just don't read a lot of them.
It's a taste thing, right? And that's okay. But if people are getting something out of it, then like, hell yeah.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for talking to me this afternoon. And do you have any more plugs? Do you want to say what you're doing or anything for sale?
I have shops. I have two different Instagrams. Well, I have multiple Instagrams, but one of them is like my comics and my illustrations, and that one's Dead Bird Party. And I have a big cartel if people want to buy my comics, in the link in that bio. I also have this like pin business called the Foragers Club. If people are into that sort of thing, it's like botanical pins, and it's at the Foragers Club. And the shop for that is in the link in that bio, if people want to buy things from me.
And you should. They're so cool.
Thanks.
I think I have a pin and a patch from you on like half of my outfits. Like
Amazing.
vests and stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
Rep you all the time. And I know
I
all
rep you
friends and
all the
family
time.
too.
Oh, yay.
My sister-in-law told me that she bought a bunch of stuff off your website. And I was like,
Oh, oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
yeah. Well, thank you
Oh,
so much.
also, can I give a shout out? Sorry, I forgot. Who did I not shout out yet? I wrote down a list. Probably, I just want to shout out Juno as my partner, who's also a comic book artist. And then Lucky's. I get a lot of comics from them, and everyone should go buy their comics. Titans, obviously, as we already established. Yeah, also, I want to shout out Keith. He's this lovely kid who went to Stova this past year, and I did a thing where we we just hung out and made a comic. He made a comic, and I like sort of gave him like help with it. And he lives in Inuvik, and I think he's going to school this fall maybe, but he's great. And I just wanted to shout out Keith as like another northern comic book artist from Inuvik. So yeah.
That's the same Keith that went to Sova?
Yeah, he went to Stova this year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you met him.
I met Keith.
Yeah, he loved you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keith is great.
Yeah. Yeah, cool Keith.
Yeah, so keep your eye out, folks. Up and
Yeah.
coming.
There's lots of up-and-coming emerging Yukon artists. You just don't know about them yet.
That's why I want to create a press, because I want to specifically uplift and like publish people like from the territories, because there's a lot of comic book artists in the territories that need, they're doing great, but also like it would be nice to like collect them in anthologies and like publish them and stuff. So
yeah, they deserve a platform.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Kim, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, talk soon. Thank you. This was really fun.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.